Hello and welcome back to The Great Game, an Australian megagame podcast. I'm Patrick,
And I'm Jack.
and this is episode 9, The Dark and Stormy Night.
Just some quick announcements before we start. Gen Con Online will be kicking off starting from Thursday, the 30th of July. Lots of exciting mega game stuff happening for that one. Den of Wolves, the super popular mega game, will be going off on Friday, and I believe a second session for Saturday as well. But check the calendar because those tickets have sold out super fast. The Mega Game Coalition is also going to be doing a big seminar on the state of mega games in 2020 on Friday, which is awesome. It'll include on that seminar Matthew and Chris from Mega Game Assembly, as well as Stefan, who's you may remember from our episode on Owl League, which we're currently playing in right this second. So that'll be super exciting. We'll be tuning in. It'll be 8 a.m. Saturday in Brisbane time, I think. But yeah, excited for that. In terms of other Mega Game stuff, Draft Night 3078 will be going off on Saturday on Gen Con, which is a sci-fi future for sports Mega Game, which is exciting. And on Friday and Saturday, there'll be a Mega Game called Lucidian Online, which is, I don't know too much about, but it's some kind of mini Mega Game with about 30 players that goes for an hour and a half, where you're competing for mining resources in space on asteroids. Which is awesome. Yeah, so check out as many of those as you're into. Lots of awesome, exciting stuff going on there. In our personal news, our league is ongoing. We're still playing in it. It'll be finishing up at the end of this week, basically, so that's exciting. And in local news, we have a local mega game kicking off, being tested right now from called Czar of the South. I'm not very good at pronouncing that, but by David Grounds, I believe it is. So it's just testing now. We'll include a link in the description. Get involved if you're interested in. Check it out. And yeah, that's the announcements from me.
Awesome. Plenty of stuff happening online these days, which is a good segue into the episode. So this episode 9, we are talking about Dark and Stormy Night, which was our mega game that Jack and I designed with the help of our returning podcast guest, Zach. And it was an asynchronous online mega game of gothic horror and a bit of intrigue and sort of paranoia. So in this episode, we sat down. I talked to Jack, to Zach, and also to Jason, one of the players, to do a bit of a post-mortem on the playtest that we ran, which was over 3 days, and to get everyone's opinions and ideas on how the game went and what might need to be fixed up for a future run. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, Zach, Jason, thanks for joining us today. Before we jumped in, I just wanted to put the spotlight on you, Jason, as you're sort of a new personality to the podcast. Do you want to just give us a bit of a background on your involvement in the mega game world and how you came to be involved in this game?
Sure. Well, I've been in Brisbane Mega Games kind of just a little bit around, less dedicated than Jack, helping out with a few things throughout the years. So I've done some graphics and I've been a control member a couple of times and like helped out maybe with a little bit of development, mainly just in terms of playtesting.
Mm-hmm. And have you, was this your first hand at playing as a player in a mega game?
It actually was, which I didn't realize until I actually started playing it, that I'd mainly just been on the backgrounds and like really interested in mega games and keen to help out, but I had not actually done well, this probably still counts as a playtest. I still hadn't done a full mega game before.
Okay. So turning to all of you, Jack, Zach, Jason, I just thought we'd run through the list there and get an idea of what everyone's sort of. I mean, we kind of know your background a little bit, but what were your expectations coming into an online mega game experience in general, regardless of Dark and Stormy? Like Jack, what were you thinking you were going to learn or encounter going into the online space?
Sure. So, I guess just to sum up, the only big experience I'd had of online mega games was the Anubis Heresy playtest that I'd played in with John Keelsworth, and what I'd experienced in that, and also seeing some Twitch streams and stuff like that of people playing in other online mega games. Um, I guess there was a couple of things I was expecting and that I was trying to avoid when I was making Dark and Stormy Nights. One is that I felt okay, so I'll start with the negatives, right? The things that I was worried about. I was worried about rules a lot, like people not understanding the rules, the game being too mechanical. That's something I thought I noticed in other mega games where, because you don't have people in the same space as you and like physically there face to face, it becomes a lot harder to adjudicate all that stuff. Um, and that's the reason why the mega game was meant to be like really role play heavy and rules light, I guess. Yeah, and the second thing I was worried about is the um, I suppose energy of it, like the space it took up in your life, because this game, Dark and Stormy Nights, is the first asynchronous mega game that I'd ever experienced or tried or played in, which means that it went over 3 days in this example, and each day you submit one action. That was something I just didn't know how it would react at all. So it was
Yeah.
this playtest was like, all right, well let's see what happened, I guess, basically. But yeah, I'll kick it over to you guys, Jason and Zach.
I think I had probably similar expectations as Jack. Like, I was a little bit worried about how much time it was going to take up. Um, I try to be pretty low on my internet checky throughout the day as I go on, and so I was like, oh, maybe this is going to take up a lot of time. That was one of the things, and apart from that, I didn't really look into too much what was going to actually happen. I just kind of turned up on the day, um, read my background, and started playing.
For myself, I had some background, as with Jack, as part of the Sons of Anubis playtest, which I believe you guys have spoken about previously. I've also had some experience with play-by-post or like forum roleplay games. So, yeah, the idea that you're playing Dungeons and Dragons or some variant thereof. And in hindsight, if I had taken my experiences with that and tried to apply it to a mega game, what I would have found, what I would have thought of, is that one of the biggest issues with play-by-post is player involvement and player retention. It's very difficult to keep people interested and ongoing in something that stretches over a long period of time, particularly when the action isn't condensed down into a small period of time, basically. It's hard to keep that interest and excitement, particularly with doing things online. It's hard to keep that going over a longer period of time. But otherwise, for this particular online mega game, I had very little expectations going into it, apart from that I was looking forward to doing stuff with it.
I was just gonna add that, like, building on like the idea that there are actually many similar kind of examples of online mega games that aren't called online mega games because mega games is a fairly new concept in the public imagination. Um, so I played Neptune's Pride and some other early games which are kind of pervasive games over a long period of time, which is like you say you play a week, um, you play it on a browser or something that's generally a pretty similar interface, and you coordinate your actions as a little bit of diplomacy. And I think that was one of my expectations going in, that I found those games kind of tend to take over your life, which is like that you think at one point, like when you're like in the bathroom or like not talking to anyone, or just like any single moment, you're like, I should quickly just check where my ships are, and maybe if I talk to this person, then I could get them to do that. I think this was a lower version of that, but that was something that was my background thinking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And so the intent from a designer's point of view with the game that I wanted it to take with this asynchronous nature is I was hoping it would settle into a nice routine as the days went on. It was designed so that every day at in the morning, a newspaper would be published with the events of what's going on in the game. The idea would be that you'd check in and you'd have a routine of checking the newspaper and posting your action for the day. Basically, that was the idea. Um, and we can talk about how that ended up happening in the game itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you guys brought up the other online games that exist out there that could fall into the category. I went sort of backwards on it with how you went, Zach, where I had that background in some play-by-post stuff a long time ago, and I didn't realize the crossover point there until we were sort of deep in it. And I didn't expect that's what it was going to end up looking like or have those similarities. And then likewise, just the definition of mega games and them porting into the online realm. Again, even before I heard of mega games and tried my hand at the designing, I'd run some similar things online back in the day where it was essentially a mega game, but it was a team of one and you were running a nation or something, and it was via posts on the forum. And it's funny how, well, yeah, a lot of these ideas and concepts like crossover and meet each other on this forum, and now the mega games are actually making their way back online. But it's slightly different to what's out there. What Dark and Stormy itself, I thought we better just quickly dive into exactly what it is and what it was meant to be and how it was designed, what it was designed to be. Jack, did you want to kick us off from the moderator slash designer perspective, just to talk about what? Can you like summarize the setting or in the theme? What was it? What was it about?
Sure. So, Dark and Stormy is a rules light, roleplay heavy, gothic horror mega game, and the idea of the setting and the theme is that it's a bunch of those super fun gothic horror tropes all mashed up in a interesting way. So you've got the classic Frankenstein's monsters and mad science and terrible werewolf creatures, all this kind of stuff, but with kind of interesting twists on it. The players play in 3 different locations, and they gather in those locations and try to cooperate to take actions. So, for example, one of those locations is the village. Everyone on the village is seemingly on the same team, but they have secret teams amongst themselves. So they might secretly belong to the wolf faction or secretly be a cult, all this kind of stuff. And they're posting on the forum each day to take an action. The core mechanic of the game is that you post what action you want to take. So you say, hey, I want to get wood for the village. Anyone want to help me out? Because we really need this wood to survive the winter. And people can reply to your post helping out your action. The more people who reply, the better chance your action has to succeed. But you need to actually accept their help before it takes effect, because anyone who you accept help from can sabotage your action. Secretly, they message the moderators. They say, hey, this person's accepted my help to find wood. Actually, I'm going to stab them in the back or poison them, all that kind of thing. So it's a game about cooperation, treachery, subterfuge, different alliances, dark, gothic horror, stuff like that. That's the basic idea.
And so, from the intro, I have a feeling what this answer might be. But Jason, from the player perspective, before you jumped in, what was your take on it? What were you expecting?
I knew it was an online mega game. I had a kind of a pitch of the theme, and so I think, expecting kind of what Jack told me. I think in the version that I played, there wasn't the sabotage. Is that right, Jack?
Yeah, that's right. So we changed a lot of there was sabotage, but basically there was some changed mechanics around that.
Yeah, it was more like it wasn't as defined as sabotage, but the option to do it was kind of there. It was just happened in a different, a more fluid way.
Essentially, we changed things so that instead of each person getting this private sabotage action, your team got an action to screw people over and do stuff like that. So in your secret team, you would take one private action.
With that said, Zach, did you have anything to add to the setting and theme, or kind of nailed it?
Setting and theme, I think what Jack said was pretty good. Gothic horror, lots of inspiration from different kinds of, at least for me, Eastern European folklore. So
Yeah, and I think a lot of that really shone through. A lot of I mean, in practice, it's a different story that we'll be delve into. But in design, a lot of the backstory and the descriptions and sort of flavor of the game was pretty evocative for that kind of setting. So, just quickly before we start, a bit of our, I think Jack's been calling it a post-mortem. I just wanted to run through, just so everyone is clear, what your roles were in the game. So Jack, you were one of the moderators. Can you just give us a rundown of what your responsibilities were?
Sure. So for this playtest, it took place over 3 days, and we had the castle and the forest locations. I ran the castle basically, and was responsible for doing all of the player actions that people took in the castle.
And Zach, you were on the other side of the moderated team with me. What was your sort of jurisdiction responsibilities?
So before the game, while Jack did most of the development side of things, I helped write some stuff for the forest location and its sub-location, the Hidden World. And then during the game, yourself and I, Pat, ended up handling the actions that came in through the forest and the Hidden World.
And Jason, you were a player. Can you give us a quick rundown of your role in the game?
I was the druid. I was in the forest location, and I was part of a hidden team that was the Coven, and that was just a two-person team with me and another player that was the Witch Child.
Alrighty then. So, just staying with you, Jason, as the druid and with your other teammate, your co-conspirator. What did the game look like from your perspective as the player before it started? Once you, I mean, well, I suppose we can say once it had started and you realized who you were and you'd read your briefing and you were connected with your teammate. What did it look like? Sort of in the physical realm with the website and how you're interacting with it and all of that. How did you find um, engaging with the game?
So there were kind of like a few different areas that I'd interact with. So like the first thing is that I'd have a look at my profile, and that gave me like a description of who I was, the assets that I had to use, um, who was on my team, what my team wanted to do, and what my kind of secret objective was. So that was kind of gave me like a very clear, okay, these are the things that you want to do. And then like the interfaces I had to do that was we had a little chat that was just for the forest. So that was just like casual conversation. People say whatever they want, who are you? What are you doing? Having a look at the chat, one of the things that like we started to realize is that some people would post in the chat and some people wouldn't. There would be a lot of silent people in the chat. But a lot of kind of my key, I guess, conversation was starting to talk to my fellow teammate, try and work out what we're trying to do, and then maybe start to message some other players. So that is I have my profile that kind of tells me what I want to do. We have a casual chat, and then like the key way that I actually interact and do actions with the game is inside the forest zone. So in the forest, it has a little bit of description of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So day one, we had a little bit of a brief. It told us these things were happening. These were kind of the key concerns. And then I had to choose an action, and I have one action per day. And then try and get people hopefully to help me with their action. And I would also help other people with their action if I think it was worth supporting.
And so on that first day, we were talking about earlier that this was a 3-day affair in this case, each day being a single turn. And as Jack said, each turn you got to do one action. Um, How did you find your time spread across the term, as far as, reading about what other people were doing, communicating with other people, conspiring with your teammate, and then the act of doing an action? How did you find that as far as your time investment went, like your involvement with the game throughout that 24 hours or however long it was?
So generally, what it was trying to work out, first of all, like what actual the game is, what I was doing, what I was kind of trying to get done, and what levers I had to pull. And so I think the first little bit, I kind of thought I was just constrained to the group chat, and then I worked out that I could go beyond the group chat and start messaging players individually. So even if I hadn't had a chat set up with them, I could start talking to them. Um, and so what it ended up being is that, like, most of the time was having a look at the group chat, seeing what we're saying, maybe messaging someone else, waiting for a reply, going back and then checking what was happening in the forest, which was who had already posted actions, what sort of support had they asked for. And so I think in some ways, like, it ended up like looking like social media in terms of go without notification, just going through and checking the different things and seeing what's happening, is anything new happening. And
Mm,
then it was like toward, I think most of the time, a lot of the actions tend to happen pretty late in the day as people kind of worked out what they were trying to do or got enough support that they thought it was a good action. I had one day where I was out most of the day and only checking it a little bit, and then I came back and I was trying to input all my like support and final actions at the last minute, and was just having some problems getting everything in
yeah.
before the deadline.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is maybe a good point to bring up a pretty critical flaw in this particular playtest that's probably worth looking at for anyone who's making an asymmetric mega game. So as I said, we expected there to be a routine that people would settle into, where every morning you check the newspaper and then you do your action. Um, which I hoped would be like a nice thing in this kind of coronavirus isolation thing. You know what I mean? Like if you don't have people to see, you're not going out very much, it has a nice routine to it. What ended up happening is that people uh, ended up submitting their actions as late as they possibly could on each day. Which is like, so, like first day, they submitted their actions kind of throughout the day. People did things throughout the day. By the second day, we rapidly got to a point, and then the third day, even more so, we rapidly got to a point where, the cutoff was 7 p.m. and people were submitting their actions at 6:58. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was not something that we expected at all, and it was definitely a huge deal.
To kind of expand on that, Jack, do you want to explain why people were doing that?
I think there's a multiple reasons for that. The key issue is that I think the key issue is that people wanted to make sure that no one else knew what they were doing, so that no one else could sabotage or stop what they were doing. So the idea was, for example, if you have this action where you want to, I don't know, you want to rescue someone from jail. Then people would gather together, make a secret group chat with anyone they can get to help them with that action. And they would plan out, okay, everyone be at the computer at 6:58 and we'll all just immediately post this action and then immediately all help each other with it. So that it's too late. The deadline then switched down. No one has had a chance to see that we're doing that. No one has had a chance to stop us. Now, in reality, that plan didn't actually tend to work because everyone else was also on at 6:58. So everyone would see this at 6:58 and then also suddenly, as fast as they can, do the counter to that action. So it didn't stop people from, working against each other. But I think that's probably the key thing. And I think the root cause of that is that there was such a sense of competition among everyone, right? Like that everyone felt like they were against everyone else, even members of their own team. We got quite a bit of feedback from people saying, I wasn't sure if I could trust my own teammates. And I think part of that is a design thing that we could work on, but part of that competition aspect is probably also the online nature of it, that you can't see anyone, right? You don't get to see or talk to your own teammates face to face, so you have much less of a strong bond with them, and there's a much greater sense of me versus them, I feel like. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Sorry, I would actually like to jump on that and say that it was a design choice, at least from the stuff that I worked on, to have that sort of level of conflict in the game. When I was working on it, the idea was that to have an interesting interaction for players in this mega game, you want to have conflict. And so the idea that people are afraid of or are concerned that other teams might trying to stop what they're doing, or that other teams are working against them in secret, that sounds like the kind of thing you actually want to have, such that there's interaction and involvement between players and between teams. However, at least in this case, it did end up, given the asynchronous nature of the online mega game, it ended up creating the situation where people were trying to not game the system, but trying to shoot for edge cases where you're posting as late as possible to try and reduce the amount of time that other people might have the information. So that's kind of my thought process behind why we did that initially, and then how that didn't work out because of the technical sides of what we were doing. Jason, did you have something to add on to that?
Yeah, well, I definitely did see that happen on the other side of I saw that happening as competing players, saw a lot of people posting at the last minute, and it seemed that they were doing that thing where they were trying to get in before anyone could oppose them. But personally, that's not actually what I was trying to do. The reason that I was posting on the last minute is that I was having these conversations throughout the game. So I was trying to get people on side before I locked in my action. So I wasn't necessarily trying to oppose someone, but I was trying to get, hey, if I do this, will you support me? And can I get this? Okay, doesn't seem like I'm getting firm support from you. Maybe I should try something else to do. So for me, it was more on the collaboration side, but that still took a long time to do because it was kind of like a little bit of back and forth. And because it wasn't like we were all at our computers rapidly typing away, I was doing a post, I'd wait for someone to get back to me, then I reply to them, and it would just kind of take a long time for it to happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's also worth mentioning that we did do a previous playtest to this, which was in like a classical real-time mega game where people had 15, 20 minutes to submit their actions instead of all day. And in that, which maybe you'd expect, people weren't waiting until minute 19 to submit their actions, right? Because you needed to give people some amount of time to react to it. But I think, I agree with you that it's not part of it. I think is the competitiveness of it, and of course, you want competition and conflict in a mega game, and part of it is people want to get as much information as they can before they make their move, which is completely normal and natural as like a player instinct. But it's hard to know how to fix both those issues because they're pretty, partially perhaps they're inherent a bit in the system. Partially, maybe you need to have a system where everyone's actions are secret so that you can't interfere with each other. But I don't know. It's a difficult problem to solve, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. To be honest, this was one of the most interesting things to come out of the end of the game, the discussion around this point and how we could solve it. I found it interesting that when I went into the design of this a long time ago with you, Jack, when it first, long before it was defined mechanically, the kind of sabotage and working against each other and having secret agents and stuff wasn't as big of a factor as I had thought it would end up being. And I think it developed well into being a major component of the game because it fits so well in the theme. But I just remember when we were running through the playtests, being kind of surprised at when I saw the first signs of people doing this kind of behavior and other things where they were really keen to get the upper hand on someone because there was just so much paranoia, which, yeah, I think it's part of the game, but it is a hard thing to navigate. in those post-game discussions with the players and between us on the mod side, I think we did come up with a few ideas that could help navigate this if we wanted to keep it a part of the game. Having a time where people could put actions forward, and then there's a separate period after that where people are allowed to support them or go against them. So you sort of stagger things out. And then I think another idea was incentivizing people to post earlier, so that the sooner they post an action up, the more impact it has, because they got it done in the morning and I guess made themselves more vulnerable. So there's a lot of little things there that we could play around with, but yeah, I'm not sure if we've totally solved that particular problem.
I was just gonna say, from a player's perspective, like one of the reasons that I had that paranoia was that what I was seeing, like from my player perspective, is that I did have like clear signals that like I shouldn't trust anyone, which is I worked out throughout the game that I had like some hidden goals and some hidden information. I had a single teammate, and they didn't have the exact same information as I did. And I didn't think I was supposed to share the information with them, and they were clearly hiding things from me. And then there was someone else who it seemed like they should be on my team because they seemed to have similar motivations and a similar theme, but they weren't on my team. And I was supposed to try and get information out of them somehow. So there was lots of things that was kind of telling me to be paranoid and telling me to kind of try and work around work in secrets and don't be open with anyone. Don't it didn't really I guess it didn't really encourage coalition building. It encouraged little secret side discussions.
Yeah, definitely. And that, the paranoia and the competition was intentional. It's just, I guess we didn't realize how big an effect that would have on the game and how much paranoia and competition there would be and what impact that would have in terms of trying to hide your actions as much as possible. So I think, so we've talked a bit about the last minute actions issue. And that's something, but there are, I think, quite a few related issues that stem from this. For example, we had some people who would post an action and then edit it at the last minute, so that it said a different thing to what it initially said. We had people who changed their names, or all this kind of stuff would happen. And I think fundamentally that's because no one wanted people to know what action they were taking, right? So I feel like in order to really work with this format where people are posting actions publicly and helping each other, you would need to change it to almost a cooperative game, right? It would need to be a game where you want everyone to know what action you're taking, and you want to post your action as fast as possible so that everyone can see what you're doing so that they can help you. It would need to be something without that element of competition and paranoia, which is unfortunate because that's what the kind of core concept was. But I guess that's my feeling at the moment, at least.
To sort of actually oppose something that Jack said there, the two examples that you provided, one being someone changing their name and the other being someone editing their post after they had posted it, in both cases, I think that was actually born out of the idea of having a mechanics light mega game. In that, in both cases, there wasn't explicitly something saying that, hey, this is not something you should do. In the case of someone changing their name, they just wanted to have what they thought was a better sounding name. And in the case of someone editing their post, for me, that's something which is harder to justify in terms of the mega game, but for them it was something that they had signposted a couple of times and then had tried to make it clear that they were doing something like this. However, in the time constraints that people had and without the sort of tonal information that you can get from an in-person mega game, that didn't come across. And so what ended up happening was that people weren't aware that that was happening. And so, like, I don't think in that case people were trying to game the system or hide actions. I think that was more born out of a situation where, because there wasn't a strict mechanical framework, which was deliberate, there was cases where, and this is what you would expect in a playtest, there was cases where there was unexpected outcomes based off player interpretations of what they could and couldn't do.
Another thing that happened is that people would post publicly an action and then secretly message me as the moderator and go, hey, I've said I'm doing this, but I actually want to do this thing. So I found that it's not a thing that I would point at one particular player, but I definitely felt an overarching feeling that people didn't want their actions to be publicly known. That's more of a so it's not really about that one specific example or anything like that, but it's an overall feeling I got from players, I guess.
And I think that's fair. It's not an either or situation here. It's there is the strong sense of paranoia and trying to hide what they're doing, but also I think one of the other things to think about when working with these online mega games is that oftentimes it's there's not moderators on the floor generally trying to make things run smoothly, and so people can easily get confused or not be clear on what they can and can't do in a mechanical sense. So
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I'd add to that are those two original examples of people editing posts and changing names. Those are, in a way, systemic issues with the medium that we were working in and the tools that we had, which we basically adapted from other places. There wasn't a fit for purpose built thing for this game, so we had to adapt to tools that we could access easily and use easily, and that led to a lot of little systemic issues that we might talk about a little bit later.
So I was just going to say, I think we should mention the reason why this stuff is a problem. Like, the reason why it's a problem for people to submit their actions at the last minute and everything is that the less stuff is publicly available for players to interact with, the less interesting the game is, right? So if everyone is off taking secret actions, doing things secretly, all that kind of stuff, then the actual game bit, the forum, the stuff that people can publicly interact with, looks like a bit of a barren wasteland, right? Which is like, it looks like, oh, there's no one even playing this game. Where are they all? And so that's the core problem there, is you want stuff to be publicly out there. You want to know what other people are doing, because that's the game bit,
Yeah, so I think that's like the components there that we've talked about, I think, are some of the most interesting lessons and outcomes from the game. The way that players felt and the way that the game's design sort of positioned them to feel and act in a certain way, and then the way that kind of went against or complicated the intent, I find really interesting. But we've talked a lot about the front end and how the game looked from the player's perspective and how they engage with it. Jack, did you want to just run us through quickly what this game was actually like from a moderator perspective?
Sure. So it was all run using a Wix, which is a simple website builder. And the way it worked is you'd have the public forums what people are posting on, and then the private chat, which each team has their own little private chat with one moderator in it. So as a moderator, the idea is each day you'd post the newspaper for the day. Then you would go through it, check in every now and then if people have questions. And at the end of the day, everything closes down and you look at all the actions that people have posted. People have posted actions publicly on the forums and privately in the private chat. And you collate those all up and roll a dice to see if they succeed based on assets that they have put into it and how many people have said to help them. So you roll the dice, you see if they succeed, and then you type up a newspaper for the next day saying, here's what happened. So being in charge of the castle, that's what I did for the castle each day. So it was a lot of that stuff was really awesome and cool. It's a lot like being a DM in D&D or a role-playing game of your choice. But I think it's probably worth mentioning the second big thing that was really surprising, which is I was very surprised how much work this game was to run as a moderator. Because it was roleplay heavy, people needed a lot of advice and direction on what kind of stuff they could do. And that ended up being a lot more work than anticipated. I'm sure you could talk about that as well, Pat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I went into this, and I think all of us did. The three of us actually went in saying, well, we're not going to be sitting in front of the computer all day and helping people out all the time. We'll just do when the timer runs out and all the actions are in, then we'll get together and collate them and go through them. It didn't end up being that we needed to be 24/7 sort of help desk, but there was a lot of questions and a lot of conversational stuff that I couldn't help but engage with. So, yeah, I think it was good in a way. It was fun to see some more insight into what the players were doing, but it quickly showed not only how intense the resolution was, which was us sitting down every night to go through, the results of the actions and write them up, but the time that you had to invest throughout the day, just snippets to check in, it ended up being quite a huge investment of time for the moderator team. And I think one of the early bits of feedback I mentioned to you guys was I don't think it would be a sustainable thing to be able to get people to do that amount of work for a long, more than three nights in a row. That being said, the physical act of doing that resolution each evening was you and Jack and Zach and I all jumping on Discord and opening up these spreadsheets and translating stuff from the website and discussing who was doing what. And that was pretty fun. At least at the start, there was a lot of excitement about what the players were doing, and there was a lot of schemes, and it was always interesting to hear, oh, you won't believe what this guy's doing, and then, oh, you have to wait till you resolve that action because this person's actually going to mess with them. And there was a lot of I'm not sure what the word is, but the excitement of being behind the curtain and seeing all these things happen. But it was a lot of work and a lot of time investment.
To sort of jump in on that, actually, I think there's a lot of time investment translating what people have written down as roleplay actions into their mechanical equivalent, combining all those things, generating a result, and then trying to convert the result back into something that we can put as a roleplay or like as a newspaper on the next day. I think while it was very enjoyable, creative writing is something that I enjoy doing if I'm not particularly good at it. And then there's the issue of just having to translate what is 20 different posts or assistances from people, some which are easier than others, but in some cases, the people who are most interested in the game are trying to do creative things with their actions, which is great, but it also means that then there's more emphasis on us trying to translate those actions into something that we can fit into the fairly flexible but still a mechanical framework behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so because when you're running a role-playing game, you're there with people in person usually, right? You can see their faces and their expressions, and they say, hey, I want to do this thing, and you can check in and go, oh, okay, hold on, you realize that'll have this consequence, right? And stuff like that. And you can make sure you understand what their meaning is. But in this system where it's asynchronous, maybe they're not online, whatever, you don't get that luxury. So it's much more work to interpret what they actually mean by their text post, right? And sometimes, I definitely did misinterpret things and take things in directions that players didn't mean to take it, which is, kind of hard to. That's just kind of a part of the medium, unfortunately. So I think that is one stage, one part. At the end of the day, interpreting what people wanted to do was quite tricky but enjoyable. But for me, the second part of responding to people's questions and complaints throughout the day, well, not usually complaints, mostly people were very positive about it, which was nice. But responding to people throughout the day, I was surprised how stressful I found that. And it's interesting because, like, running a mega game can be very stressful, right? But to me at least, it's always a really fun, great kind of stress. Everyone's very high energy. You're doing this for maybe 6 hours, Everyone's all in it. Maybe you have people who have questions or queries or stuff that you need to tackle all throughout the day. But it's basically this one big burst of energy, and then it's over, and you can relax and enjoy it. Having that stretched out over 3 days and having it happen asynchronously meant that instead of this one big burst of energy, it's like little random stuff popping up throughout the day. You know, like little notifications going blunk blunk throughout the day, and that was more stressful for me by far. And it felt like it meant that it was kind of difficult to relax throughout those 3 days. Because you feel like anytime you're doing something else, you're like, oh, what if someone's asking a question, or what if someone has an issue I need to handle? So I was really surprised. I don't think it was more work responding to queries throughout those 3 days or anything, but the way the work was portioned out, the way it happened, really was, way more stressful than I expected, basically.
Yeah, definitely for me as well. I found that I didn't expect to be so mentally focused on it when I was busy off doing other things, but there was definitely a time I remember when I was out for a stroll around the neighborhood, enjoying my restrictions that were loosening at the time. And someone messaged me something that was not essential at all, but I decided that I needed to fix it then and then because it was already in the afternoon and I didn't want to. I didn't want something to delay someone's decision making or the discussions about their actions. So I remember standing on the side of the street on my phone, and nothing works well on the phone as far as the website we were using. It wasn't that user friendly, and putting together all these things from the admin side and then the player side and chatting to different people and just resolving this little issue that ended up not being a big deal, but it definitely was a good demonstration of how present it made you feel in the game 24 hours.
Definitely. And I know that that type of work, or that type of labor, if you want to call it that, is something that a lot of people really enjoy. Like that's a lot of people's jobs, right? They're a social media manager, all this kind of stuff. They need to handle various little tasks that happen throughout the day. But I guess I was surprised to discover that that's definitely not me. Like I need to be someone who, there is one big task and you remain completely 100% focused on that particular task for the duration that you're doing it. And then once you've done the task, it's over, rather than a multitasking, going back and forth thing. That's definitely something I struggle with.
To put a final attachment, a final thought onto Pat's point, there is an issue, I think, with the asynchronous nature where if someone has an issue, you want to fix it right away because they might not be there when you get back to it, if that makes sense. If they've gone off to do stuff and then it feels like you've messed up their involvement in the game. And that was one of the things that happened for me, was the idea that someone has an issue, I need to fix this now, because if it's not fixed, then they're gone in the next hour or so, they might not get a post in, and then we've kind of both ruined their action and also the information that we want out of the playtest. So there's that, like, it feels stressful to be trying to fix issues when they come in rather than when you feel like you can.
Definitely. Jason, did you have anything to remark on this from a player perspective in terms of the checking in now and then? Because I know in your feedback you mentioned a bit of this in terms of bleed.
Yeah. Oh no. Like I very much feel. I think from the player's perspective, like the same thing that Jack said. That from a player or a moderator or anyone that's kind of involved in an action, I really like being very focused on that, devoting my energy to that, and feeling that I'm doing that very, very well, as opposed to the idea that this is happening in the background while I'm doing something else, and it's affecting me trying to generally enjoy my life, whether that's going for a stroll or sitting down and having a coffee. It didn't quite yeah, the promise of, okay, at the start of my day I sit down and I read my little brief from it, I think for a couple of minutes, I'm like, okay, this is my action, and then I go away and I check back in later, make a couple of likes, and then go off. It just didn't quite have that yeah, like relaxing vibe. It had the stressful vibe, I think, on both sides.
Yeah, it's amazing what we put ourselves through for a mega game in any format.
Yeah, but I think what Jack was saying is that it's really surprising what the difference is in terms of like I would definitely still be up for like, doing an 8 hour very intense mega game, forgetting to sit down, drink water, eat food, go talk to you, solve this, do that, walk around the room, check that everyone's going okay, try and get this person to talk to that person, like that, like going the whole time is very enticing, but like doing that for like a minute and then going away and then coming back, like the flow is just not quite there.
Yeah, yep. And that's probably a good point to reiterate how this was the second playtest that we ran through, and the first one that Jack and I did, we did do in a more short form sort of version where we did it over a few hours in an afternoon, and turns weren't a day; they were only 20 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. And the pressures were on then more in the format of a mega game when you go to the town hall and play out a 6 hour affair. They felt more like that, but they were still quite different because of the nature of action and then resolution. So the players would buzz around for 20 minutes and really get into it and do it was essentially the textural version of what a normal mega game in the live world looks like. And then once that was over, they had to sit there and do nothing for 20 minutes, which usually bled into longer, while Jack and I feverishly typed away and tried to generate stuff that there was absolutely no way of generating in the time we had. So it's yeah, it's not something that you can just port across in this case, but I know that some groups have done these things online successfully in different formats using Discord and that kind of thing. And I think that Dark and Stormy just wasn't designed from the get go. It was designed from the get go to be a long form game, and so at this point, I'm not sure we could port it backwards.
Yeah, this is slightly tangential, but I
Sure.
think from like my previous experience playing digital pervasive games, so I'm not sure if that's the right term, but games that you play over a long period of time, a week, a month, that have like very structured actions. So generally they're delayed actions. Like if it's a space game, I send my fleet over to the other side of the galaxy. That's going to take 36 hours. And sometimes I get up at 3 a.m. or I schedule at a particular time to make sure that happens. And the discussions that are having on the background are important, but they're not as important as your actions, which don't need any sort of moderation. So, kind of that had like similar stressful things, but I know many people really, really enjoyed that. I think it's kind of like a little bit between those two things where it's like a mega game online is like really, really high energy in the room, and this mega game offline was just a little bit syncopated and a little less clear, whereas the like digital pervasive games I think did fit a niche within that. So maybe a question is, do you want to head towards something that is back towards like something that's not a mega game, or try and get that high energy that the mega game provides you?
Yeah, definitely. So I agree. One potential avenue you could take to solve some of these issues is making the game more mechanical. And so, the more you head in that direction, and the more you have a technical solution to it, the less moderators have to do. So it becomes something where the moderators get less and less stress. But I think for me, even in the games you're talking about, like Neptune's Pride and these computer games which run over multiple days, um, yeah, like you mentioned, players are still getting up at 3 a.m. to do their actions, right? It still has that same kind of real world stress where like this stuff is kind of blipping on throughout the day. Yeah, and I just feel like probably for me, and I don't know about you, Patrick, but for me, that's probably not the experience I'm interested in, I guess.
Yeah, I think I could adapt to it in different ways, depending on what the tools were that we had at our disposal. But I do agree. from this experience, but also the observing other online mega games and how they've been run so far, I think it's not the forum for me as a moderator, anyway. But we're soon to see what it will be like as a player with the Owl League coming up shortly. I don't know if it'll have happened by the time this goes out, but we'll see. I wanted to swing it back to the player perspective. What was your favorite thing, or what did you think was most successful in this whole playtest?
So the thing that was kind of like most evocative for me, and kind of like the strongest experience, I think, was my like initial entry into the game, which is I saw my player screen, it had a profile, it gave me my objectives, and all that seemed just like it seemed pretty well written, very evocative. It fit within the general like aesthetic of the website. All the other players had like very strong names that were very archetypal without feeling that they were really ripping anything off. Like it didn't feel like it was a B like a C Tolkien version. It was its own thing that, as I think Zach said, kind of inspired by Gothic horror and European folklore. So it felt like it just like felt really strong going in. And I think that was the thing that I was like, okay, this seems really interesting, and I'm excited to find out who the different characters are, what they're trying to do.
I actually think that's one of my favorite parts of it as well. What Jack and Zach put together with the lore and that kind of thing, and just from the early days, seeing when we first started talking about the idea of an online mega game that would kind of include this world or this story. Jack immediately had all these ideas that, yeah, they created like a very rich tapestry early on and only grew from there. So I think that's something that I really enjoyed. What about from the moderator side, Zach?
Well, I actually just wanted to, I guess, thank the both of you because particularly Jason, seeing as I wrote your character, so thank you very much that you thought it was well written. But my favorite thing is sort of the flip side of what Jason was saying is that there were people who thoroughly enjoyed their characters. They thought they were excellent or that they fit really, really well. There was some glowing feedback from a couple in particular, and that feels amazing. As in, it's great when you try and work on something or write something out, and someone goes, "I really enjoyed this character." That was probably my favorite part of watching the playtest unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some awesome, fantastic role playing from people, and chiming in and listening to the group chats between different teams and people talking about what they're planning to do, and everyone chatting in character in the little chat thing and posting in character and bickering amongst themselves about what they're going to do. All of the role playing stuff was really satisfying and fantastic to see.
And so on the flip side of that, with acknowledging, all the positives and what people enjoyed, and I think broadly the feedback was that people did enjoy it, in acknowledging, aside acknowledging some of the issues that it had. On the flip side, what was the biggest lesson that you guys learned about putting mega games in this medium? We've talked through a lot of things specific to this mega game, but what was the biggest thing that you learned about it in general, about going online with this kind of experiment?
Yeah, so I think we have really given the game a kick in, which is probably deserved. But like, I think we should probably mention that overall there was a lot of great positive feedback as well as really good critical feedback, which was really useful. So it was an extremely successful playtest, and it identified these issues. I think the key things that I took away in terms of lessons for online mega games is, I think, the thing that needs to be, well, first of all, I think I learned that probably asynchronous mega games have a lot of these issues that I really need to see solved, and that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to see and play in the Owl League, to see how that works and how it goes in that game. um, yeah, second, I think it's that capturing the energy of a real life mega game and the feeling that everyone's there and in it and really engaged. I think that is probably the biggest thing to focus on beyond game mechanics or beyond the setting. It's giving everyone that feeling and atmosphere that you get from a mega game when you can see 50 people face to face, like giving people the feeling that there's all these engaged people. That is, I think, probably the key issue that needs to be solved for an online mega game. And I think in some ways we did have that. Like, we had a lot of these great group chats where everyone's chatting and in character and it's all popping off, which was great. But in a lot of ways we failed, and I think that's the key thing we'd have to fix, basically.
Zach, what about you? What do you think that you've learned about online mega games?
Well, my list of notes that I took before talking about it here, to be perfectly honest, we've already covered. Running it, there was a time sink, which we've gone over in detail. Asynchronous actions have a lot of issues, which I think were exacerbated by the medium and the setting that we spent a fair amount of time discussing previously. And also just maintaining involvement over the course of a day, I think, is difficult, particularly when people want to have support for, or have involvement from other players on actions. And so, like, all these things we've spent a fair amount of time talking about. So we've already covered all the things that I wanted to say about this.
Yeah, yep. Likewise, I think the biggest thing I've got from the moderator and design perspective, we covered really early on, which is the crossover with other online games of this type, like play by post, whether they're role playing or not, and how I think there's a differentiation between lots of fluff and detailed role playing and getting in character and mechanics. And I feel like once you go online with a mega game like this, especially into a text-based area and especially into an asynchronous format, the balance between roleplay and mechanics becomes even more important than it does in a live action event. And I'm not sure how you balance those out. Jason, coming in from your work with the other live mega games, and then this being the first one that you'd actually played in, did you learn anything?
Oh well, I don't think I really learnt that much in terms of I already had a sneaking suspicion like what I was going to feel at the end of it, which was asynchronous mega names are probably not for me. Um, and so just like in terms of the podcast of like this general feedback that we're getting, I would also point out that I was already skeptical that this wasn't quite for me. I was interested to see how it would play, but I think there will be some people who really like the play by post, who really like this kind of bleed into the rest of your life, always checking up, and it being something that is kind of just like a fun background activity. But for me, I think similar to the moderator experience, it was a draining background activity. It was more work and less fun. So next time, I want to do a full real time online.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with you. I think I'd be keen to try out a full online real-time game as well. But I like to hear that you kind of went in with that that outlook, because and that you stuck with it. Because throughout the game, I interacted with only a handful of players quite regularly, and there were some there which I think had a similar experience. Well, from my perspective, and again, this is this thing about reading people and understanding what they're feeling and their tone and all that. But I had I was expecting some people to sort of throw in the towel throughout the playtest because it hadn't turned out to be what they were after, and I appreciate that no one really did that. They all adapted to it and did what they could within the limits. So I think we've covered quite a lot there. We're running a little bit longer than we usually do, and we have gone into a lot of depth about some of the big issues that we kind of identified in the post game feedback and the discussions that we've had. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to add on to the analysis of this game, or also just in general, the world of online mega games, and what 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 are the opportunities that could be seized in the future, or yeah, how do you feel about online mega games in general?
The only other thing that I would kind of add on to it, which we've touched on briefly at some points, but it's the technical requirements or the technical investment that goes into running an online mega game. So while I can't speak much to it, seeing as Jack and Pat mostly did the background stuff in terms of running the site, when I was fiddling around with trying to design my own mega game with the working in conjunction with Jack, I quickly found that the technical side was quite a fair bit beyond me, and I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles in trying to get a lot of ideas that would work well on an online mega games, or like work well on an online sense working, but it requires a large amount of technical know-how and technical knowledge to actually get those working properly and in a way that won't crash burning as lots of people trying to have it run at the same time. So
Yeah, look, we haven't gone into detail on that, but there were definitely technical issues that we would want to solve in future. As you know, as everyone logged in at 6:58 into the chat and tried to all post actions simultaneously, we did get some problems there. But
I think the biggest bit of sort of final comment from me generally about online mega games is that I don't think I'm sold on them, to be honest. And it's not just based on this experience, but it's based on watching others, and maybe the Our League will turn me around on that. I think it's a difficult thing to weigh in on because of how, um, dare I say, undefined or multifaceted mega games are. Um, but the way that I've seen them ported online, including those like those runs of Den of Wolves where everything's live and everything's happening like it would in real life, I feel like it's been born out of necessity, and which I totally understand. And I think now is the time for it, and I hope that a lot of people have a lot more success with it. But I don't think it's the forum that I'm going to be investing in the future. Um, and the final thing, I guess, on the technical issues as well, as we've seen with our conversations recently with Stefan and with John, a lot of people are looking into how they can customize the tools that they use, and John's working on his own little platform that to be able to run games online. And I think that's the way that things might need to move, if we're going to see highly successful and smooth online mega games.
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Patrick says in terms of this is July 2020, and the reason why we are playing online mega games is because we can't play real life mega games, and so we're kind of looking for the substitute. And I think sometimes that can end up being more disappointing, that you know, you want chocolate cake and you end up getting carob cake. And if you like carob cake, that's fine, have carob cake. But if you want a chocolate cake, this is just like, it's not quite the same thing. So I'm excited to see, like, based on what we've talked about, there are actually, examples of online pervasive games and different things in this medium. So I think I'm excited to see, like, what is kind of the intersection bringing mega games into an online medium, and what would make it that you would do this at a time when you weren't necessarily stuck in your house. What would make you um, want to do an online mega game when there is the possibility of actually doing an offline mega game, of seeing people in the real world?
yeah, definitely. I think I'm a lot more hopeful about online making games than you guys. Honestly, I'm really excited about a lot of them, and I think even once the current crisis has passed, the huge advantage that they have over real world mega games is their accessibility to people from all over the world. And being someone as we all are, like who lives in Australia, far away from the places where mega games are being constantly run, the ability to tune into different mega games from the UK and to see how they do it and how they run things is really awesome. And I agree, it is definitely like it's carrot cake and not chocolate cake. Like it's a different experience. It's not the same thing, but yeah, based on my experience in Indie Anubis Heresy and games like that, I'm still interested in the carrot cake, basically.
Wrong with carrot cake. It's just not chocolate cake.
On that note, I might wrap us up and just run through with each of you guys. As of now, as of like you said, July 2020, where in most parts of the country we're looking at things getting much better as far as mega game prospects go. What's next for each of you in the world of mega games? Are you going to be doing any design work or any further work on online mega games? Are you playing anything coming up? What's planned for you, Jack?
Yeah, for me, I'm planning to get back in it and look at gearing up We Are Not Alone, basically, for a real life game in the future.
I'll jump on and agree with what Jack is saying in that since the last time you had me on, I've been working on what I said I would be working on. So I have been working on We Are Not Alone, and I've got some side projects which at the moment are just bucket loads of ideas in a Google Doc, and we'll see if they end up getting any further than that.
They all start somewhere.
Yep.
And Jason, what about you? Is this hasn't turned you off playing in mega games in general? Has it? You're going to be...
it actually gave me a little bit of like an inspiration or a little bit of a brain bug, like what I've been working on in just as a little bit of an exploration is prototyping out something in the digital space that would either help people run probably real-time online mega games, but also when we start going back into real spaces, give you a digital interface where we can start limiting the amount of physical components or physical interaction, which we don't know that might be really important in terms of getting people comfortable being back in a room with 100 people might be a bit scary. So having less touching and being able to maintain some sort of physical distance, even the next couple of years, might be a good idea. But also like what we might be able to do in terms of push the design space a little bit once we start going away from physical components and start being able to do a few more tricks behind the scenes.
Awesome. That sounds exciting. All right. Well, thank you all for indulging in this chat. I hope it's been useful and entertaining. Thanks, as always, Jack, for being yourself, and Zach for returning, and thanks for joining us, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks again for listening, and thanks to Zach, Jack, and Jason for the discussion.
Yeah, and thanks so much to all our lovely players who participated in the playtest as well. You can find me at jack@ashtowngames.com.
And as always, you can find me over at the sydneymagagamers.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.